Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amy, so much for inviting me. I really wish I was there with you all, but alas, it was not to be this year. But the chance to engage these brilliant minds on one of the sort of thorniest problems we're facing right now was far too good to resist. So Alex, Eamonn and I have sort of teamed up to hopefully engage you all in this idea of how do we develop that new story to win the narrative wars. I'm going to work on the assumption that most of you are pretty familiar with what's going out there when we talk about the anti-ESG and anti-woke backlashes, so I'm not going to dwell on them. But just a few brief level sets. I think the first thing is that I think we can all agree that at this stage, this is about more than sort of a quibble over investment theses. This is an attempt to derail the entire sustainable business, sustainable economy project. Secondly, it's not just a bunch of lone kooks. This is well-funded and well-organized. Third, we can't expect it to go away anytime soon. Indeed, it's likely to ramp up as we get into this sort of viciously contested election cycle. Fourth, unfortunately, there is evidence that it is working. And as you see on the right side of the slide here, we are starting to see a chilling effect on business voice and business action. And finally, the time to do something about this is now. So maybe, like me, you've watched from the sidelines as this narrative has gained traction so quickly, wondering how, when it seemed like we had so much wind at our backs, has this narrative been so successful in gaining so much ground so quickly? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? Well, I'm hoping that together we can start to answer some of those questions over the next couple of days. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of fodder now for thought as we seek to engage you in this conversation. So a tool that's really helped me to sort of understand a bit what's going on out there in the world is the cognitive science concept of frames. Popularized by the linguist George Lakoff, frames are more than words. They are mental structures that shape the way we see the world. Triggered by words, they are actually this complex network of associations that have been shaped in our minds through experience and our values, but they're often invisible to us, so we're not really aware of the ways that they're impacting our decisions and our behaviors. Really effective narrative frames tap into these deeper mental frames to sort of put a word and make visible what was invisible. So if you've ever had that feeling when somebody frames something really well, you're like, yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Chances are you've been framed. Historically, frames have been a critically important tool in political discourse. I'm not trying to be partisan here, but the truth is that conservatives have traditionally been much better at wielding frames to advance their agendas than progressives have. I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. You might think about the framing of pro-life. There has been a really useful tool for conservatives to position their agenda around abortion rights. Or you might think about Obamacare, which was a very effective way to reframe the Affordable Care Act to sort of impede its progress among voters who had a lot of mental frames and biases built up around President Obama. Progressives can do this too, and in a moment we will look at some great examples of how progressives have also succeeded. But I think what we can understand is that woke is the latest in a series of very successful frames that the right has sort of used to advance their agenda. So for me, when you sort of go at this through the lens of frames, we can start to understand that the reason the anti-woke and anti-ESG backlashes have gained so much ground and so much traction so quickly is because they tap into existing, very well-established frames that exist in people's minds, be they everyday Americans or business people or investors. This idea, forged in the fires of Milton Friedman, that sustainability and business are fundamentally competing forces, that ESG and sustainability are bad for business, bad for the economy, and bad for our pocketbooks. So this is why we've been successful. They've been successful, right? Because they are tapping into an existing frame. And it's much easier to activate an existing frame than it is to build a new one from scratch. And there is evidence that these attacks are landing. So this is from a recent survey by Rock Solutions, finding that now 52% of Americans, and you'll see this is across both sides of the aisle, now agree that corporate wokeism has gone too far and that companies should focus more on their products and services and less on supporting ESG and DEI initiatives. We cannot afford to let this slide, people. Frames are a critical part of how movements and elections are won and lost. And until we are able to present a sufficiently compelling frame to articulate our idea for a sustainable future, our ideas will remain vulnerable to attacks by those who wish to undermine confidence about the financial prudence of doing this, whether it's among voters, investors, business people, and so on. This is mission critical for our movement. I know it's easy to say that as the communications person, but truly, framing is not optional, it's essential. However, it's not all bad news. Interestingly, this same study also found, in data that seems to directly contradict the previous slide, that Americans also agree that companies should be held accountable to make a positive impact on the communities in which they operate. 76% agree with that, having just told us they thought the ESG woke thing was over. So what's going on here? Are Americans just really confused? Probably. But also cognitive scientists explain that contrary to what sort of people believe right now, people are actually persuadable. The majority of us are what is called biconceptual. So we hold some conservative and some progressive frames in our mind at the same time. And the side that wins is the one that most successfully activates the frame that aligns with their interests by tapping into values and showing people how the agenda aligns to their deep-seated values. So this is, for me, where the hope lies, right? Because this shows that the seeds of this new frame also exist in people's minds alongside the old. And what we need to do now is tap into, activate, and really strengthen this frame in people's minds to help move our agenda forward. So that's kind of what we want to talk to you about. A little bit more content from me, and then we're going to ask you guys to help us with creating this new frame and narrative to win the world we want. Other movements have been where we are now. They have felt just as embattled, and through the smart deployment of a reframe and the disciplined application and repetition of it, they have been able to change their fortunes and achieve success. Let's just look at how they've done it. What you're looking at now is a formula that my team created while I was at FairShare, actually in partnership with Alex, who you'll hear from in a moment, to really distill down the crucial formula for achieving success with social movements. What do successful movements share in common? And our formula was people plus passion multiplied by plot equals massive something social change. And so people, that's really about knowing exactly who you need to engage beyond your inner circle. Typically, that is this movable middle, the biconceptual middle. And it's about really offering those people a sense of shared identity and belonging. They need to feel like they can belong in your movement. Passion. This is about taking that audience from sort of passive bystanders to people who are actively engaged and willing to fight for your goals. And finally, plot. This is the very rational part of movement building. This is about having a very clear sense of what success looks like, and a very rigorous strategy for achieving it. And this is where narrative and framing comes in. Most successful movement plots contain some kind of frame or reframe that help that movement align itself with American values and move to success. I'm saying American, but these ideas are universal. So that's how you do it. Let's look at an example that was relatively recent. My friend Brian Elner was very instrumental in the narrative reframe that really helped the marriage equality movement achieve its success at the Supreme Court. As he explained to me, this movement was losing. They were getting pummeled at the polls. They realized they needed to change tack. And it was really a narrative plot twist that helped them flip the script. So for them, the target was indeed the movable middle. They needed to engage people who weren't necessarily seeking marriage equality for their own family, but would be willing to fight for this movement. And passion was really about those people who were sort of passive bystanders, like we're fine with all of this, but they weren't yet taking that to the ballot box, and that's where they needed to show up. They needed those people to show up. How they did this was through narrative plot. So they understood that gay marriage was a frame that had a lot of baggage and triggered a lot of bias in the minds of many of the people they needed to meet, who had all sorts of thoughts around who gay people were and what their lifestyles were like. Where they saw success was when they reframed their narrative around perhaps that most treasured and powerful frame of all American frames and values, freedom. So they really started to frame up their message in terms of the freedom to marry, and talking about how what families who wanted freedom to marry wanted really was just love, family, and commitment. And now the audience could see how this agenda aligned to their own values as Americans with strong family values. And they were able to really flip the movement's goals, and this resulted in Supreme Court win in Obergefell in 2015. I'm not going to go into this example in depth now. Alex is obviously the expert. He led the movement opt-out side at REI, which is a fantastic example. I'll just briefly say that what really struck me as Alex was describing this to me was that, a movement that was about closing stores on Black Friday so that associates could spend time with their families could have been messaged as anti-capitalist. It could have been very confrontational crusader. But Alex's team decided actually instead to reframe it as being pro-family. It was about their associates spending time with the people they loved on this really important day. And that shift from sort of anti to pro was crucial in why this movement was so beloved and so successful. So from these examples and many others, we can just distill a few quick points about successful frames. They're not about playing defense. Indeed, sometimes when you try and defend yourself against the opponent, you actually only succeed in reinforcing their frame in the minds of the audience you're trying to reach. So this is about setting out our vision, the world that we want to create, and asserting it with courage, conviction, and consistency every chance we get. It's very easy to get bogged down in problems and talk about what that other guy is doing wrong and why they're wrong. And particularly, obviously, when it comes to, for example, climate change, it's a massive freaking problem. We all know that, and the messaging can really focus there. But what we know from research is that can be very disempowering and shut people down. Remember, we're trying to activate them. So we need to shift the narrative to solutions. We don't need to deny there's a problem. A structure I really like is what I call the solution sandwich. Shared value, problem, solution, but really showing people how we are going to help solve their problems. The current narrative is very divisive, but we've said people want to feel belonging. So we need to be about what unites us and show everyone how they belong in our movement. Facts are very problematic from a cognitive linguistic standpoint, because if they don't conform to your dominant frame, they'll just bounce off. They just don't go in. We progressives I'm a progressive, so I'm just gonna say we tend to love facts. We tend to love to try and argue everyone into agreeing with us. It's just counterproductive. So what we need to do is shift into that world of feelings and show how what we're trying to achieve aligns with our audience's values. And that's how we'll unlock progress. People have a lot of feelings right now. We need to give them a container for all of that. And finally, fear. There is a very fear-based message out there right now. More progressive movements tend to succeed when they focus instead on hope. And if I say hope, change, yes, we can, that was, one of the most successful frames of recent progressive memory. So the last thing I'll say is just, we have so much to work with. I like to think of this backlash as what I call zombie capitalism, rearing its head to try and cling on to the model that serves their interests. But also there are many people who just can't envision another path to prosperity. But we can, and that's what we need to offer people. ESG, sustainability, they're so bloodless compared to the beauty and joy that lies on the other, the other side of achieving our goals. So let's create a lexicon that's fit for purpose. And that's where I hand over to Eamonn and Alex to take you through what we'd like from you and what happens next.
Thanks so much, Freya. So folks, listen, I'm going to keep this super, super quick here. My job right now is to invite you to lunch and then to talk and eat at the same time, if you can have a crack at that. We're going to have 5 or 6 facilitators at lunch. There are going to be 4 tables. I don't know what colour those tables are, but we'll make sure that you know where to go. My number one job is to get you to turn up. There's no good sitting in the audience, listening to all of this stuff, having this brains trust, the amount of intellectual capital we have in the room, if we can't draw on it and use it. So come to lunch. We're going to talk about this. Facilitators have got 3 really great prompts, and we're going to get you to put pen to paper if you're up for it. So gravitate to the 4 or 5 tables when we're at lunch. Grab me if you don't know where to go. Second, there's a breakfast tomorrow, 7:30 till 8:30. We want the most intense people who want to shape this narrative at that breakfast. And then third, on Friday, I've got the job of playing back the work that this group has done back to the audience. There may be some kernels of brilliance and imagination and inspiration. And I think that's it from me right now, Eamonn. I think we're going to hand over to the other folks as well. But did you want to talk about the folks who are going to help us?
I'm getting beaten up too many times today for being late. So we'll leave it there. Just give me a show of hands. How many people want to come and join us at lunch to have a conversation around this? That's excellent. So across the road, in the limelight, Vic Barrett and Emmy Scott are going to join us. Amy Yoakum here, Alex and myself, and we'll give you some stuff to work around. Thank you very much for that.
Let's hear it for Freya.
And thank you, Freya.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. Good luck.